The crystal wine glass trembled slightly in my hand, catching the reflection of the candlelight that danced across the lavishly set table. We were in the middle of a toast at my son's expansive estate in upstate New York, a moment that should have been the pinnacle of holiday joy. The roast beef was perfection. The laughter of my grandchildren was filling the room, and for the first time in years, the crushing weight of solitude seemed to be lifting from my shoulders. Then, the phone in my pocket buzzed against my hip. It was a violent, intrusive vibration that shattered the serene atmosphere. I apologized quietly, pulling the device out to silence it, expecting a spam call or perhaps a wrong number. The screen displayed unknown caller. Against my better judgment, and perhaps driven by an instinct I couldn't name, I slid my thumb across the screen and brought it to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered, turning away from the table to avoid disrupting the festive mood. "You need to leave. Right now." The voice was unrecognizable, a rasping, desperate whisper that sounded like it was being forced through a throat constricted by fear. It sliced through the warm silence of the dining room like a serrated knife. "Excuse me? Who is this?" I demanded, my voice rising just enough to draw a glance from my daughter-in-law. "Don't ask questions. Just trust me and go home immediately. If you stay, you lose everything." The line went dead with a sharp click. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone humming a monotonous note of warning. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter draft swept up my spine, paralyzing me. The unsettling urgency of the message overrode every lesson in manners I had ever instilled in myself. I looked back at the table at my son, Marcus, smiling broadly as he poured wine for his wife, and I felt a sudden, sickening lurch in my stomach. The sheer disbelief of what was unfolding was a physical shock, a blow to the chest that stole my breath. But to understand why a single phone call could shatter my world on Christmas Eve, I have to take you back to the silence that preceded the storm. 24 hours earlier, the day before Christmas Eve, the silence in my own home had been deafening. I sat in the high-backed velvet armchair that had been my husband Arthur's favorite, watching the gray afternoon light fade into an early, bruised twilight. The house, a Victorian relic that Arthur and I had restored lovingly over 40 years, felt less like a home and more like a museum of memories. The phone rang then, too. It was Marcus. His voice, usually smooth and practiced the voice of a successful investment banker, had been unnaturally cold, stripped of any familial warmth. "Mom," he had said, skipping the pleasantries. "I've talked it over with Sarah. We've decided that this year, we're going to spend Christmas just us and the kids. We need a quiet year. We won't be hosting you." Every single word hit me with the dense, crushing weight of a sledgehammer. I remained paralyzed in the leather chair, the cozy fire crackling innocently at my back. The multicolored Christmas lights that twinkled so brightly through the bay window suddenly seemed to be actively mocking my raw loneliness. "But Marcus," I stammered, my hand clutching the fabric of the armrest, "we have always. What on earth happened? Did I do something wrong? Is it about Thanksgiving?" "Nothing happened, Mom," he replied with chilling finality. "I just want a simple holiday. Sarah is completely on board with this decision. We'll call you after the new year." My chest tightened agonizingly. Sarah, my thoughtful daughter-in-law, who always insisted on baking Arthur's favorite gingerbread cookies with me, the very woman who had called me just last month to ask for advice on planting hydrangeas. It seemed impossible that she would agree to shut me out in the cold. When I finally hung up the phone, I stayed fixed in my chair for a long, quiet period. I watched the Christmas lights outside blur into watery streaks from the sudden, unwelcome dampness in my eyes. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a masterpiece of mahogany and brass that Arthur had restored himself, chimed the hour of 8. Each resonant note seemed to painfully underscore the total finality in my son's voice. Through the window pane, I watched the large, heavy flakes of snow begin to fall in thick, swirling clumps. The houses of the Millers and the Davises across the street glowed with a warm, inviting yellow light. I could see silhouettes moving behind their curtains, families gathered tightly around dining tables, sharing joyful stories and heartfelt laughter. The Davises had their massive spruce tree visible through the main window, with neatly wrapped gifts already patiently waiting beneath the green branches. "What did I possibly do to deserve this, Arthur?" I whispered to my own reflection, staring back from the cold glass. My reflection looked older than I felt, the lines around my eyes etched deep by 4 years of grieving a husband who had been my anchor. With a trembling finger, I absently traced meaningless patterns over the condensation on the glass. My mind compulsively replayed every single interaction I had shared with Marcus over the past several months. Had I been too pushy about his finances? Had I been too critical of the way they were raising the twins? Or was I just simply too much? A burden of the past that didn't fit into his sleek, modern future? I watched every single snowflake dance in the amber glow of the streetlights, remembering how Marcus, as a little boy, used to press his nose against that very window. He would count the flakes and plead with me to read him stories of Arctic explorers and great winter adventures. That sweet, imaginative child now felt like a cold, utter stranger. The night stretched out agonizingly slowly. The fire finally extinguished itself completely, leaving behind only cold ash and the faint, lingering scent of burnt oak. I drifted toward the kitchen, mechanically warming a can of soup that I knew deep down I wouldn't eat. As the microwave hummed its low, steady noise, my mind repeatedly cycled back to Marcus's voice, desperately searching for any clues I might have somehow overlooked. Desperation is a strange navigator. It led me to the drawer where I kept the old telephone directory, a relic of a time before digital contacts. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that if I called him back one last time and apologized for whatever invisible transgression I had committed, he might relent. As I pulled the heavy, worn book out of the drawer, another item slipped out with it. It was Arthur's cherished leather-bound photo album. My hands began to tremble noticeably as I opened the cover. On the very first page was Marcus at 5 years old, his infectious, gap-toothed grin stretching from ear to ear, proudly holding a wooden toy boat Arthur had carved for him beneath our massive Christmas tree. I turned the page with deliberate care. There was Arthur in our vintage kitchen, flour dusting his rich brown hair like fine snow, laughing heartily as he meticulously rolled out the dough for cinnamon rolls. The next photograph stopped my breath completely. The three of us together, Arthur holding baby Marcus tight against his broad chest, my younger self with an arm lovingly around both of them, all of us beaming into the camera. We seemed utterly invincible back then, as if there was simply nothing in the world that could ever separate us. I distinctly recalled that Christmas morning 35 years ago, Marcus clattering down the stairs in his superhero pajamas, screaming that Santa had come. Arthur was making his renowned dark roast coffee, while I feigned surprise at the sheer volume of presents. When did that sense of wonder truly die? When did my beautiful boy morph into this cold, distant stranger who viewed his mother as an obligation to be discarded? I flipped through more pages. Each subsequent photograph was a small, agonizing knife twisting deeper into my gut. There was Arthur's last Christmas, 4 years ago. The pancreatic cancer had already severely weakened him, stripping the muscle from his frame, but he still stubbornly insisted on carving the turkey himself. Marcus had visited for only 2 hours that year, always glancing at his phone, inventing new excuses about merger meetings and client demands. "Evelyn, you have to keep the family together," Arthur had whispered to me during his final week, his eyes clouded and unfocused from the medication. "Promise me you won't ever let the distance grow between you and Marcus. He is lost, Evie. He needs you, even if he doesn't know it." I had solemnly promised him. Had I failed that promise so completely? The microwave beeped with sharp insistence, but I barely heard it. Nothing mattered at all except these frozen moments in time where we had been truly whole. I closed the album gingerly, but I gently removed the photo of Arthur laughing in our kitchen. I placed it carefully on my nightstand, ensuring I could see his warm smile the very first thing upon waking. As I undressed for the cold night, Arthur's side of the bed seemed impossibly vast, a desert of pristine sheets. But tonight, it felt even more hollow, as if the unexpected loss of Marcus had somehow doubled the isolation that already permeated these silent rooms. The morning of Christmas Eve arrived with a gray, lethargic light that struggled to filter through the half-closed curtains. It cast long, weary shadows across my breakfast table. The local newspaper lay folded neatly beside a bowl of rapidly cooling oatmeal. I habitually scanned the community news, a routine that grounded me. The electronic chime of the phone startlingly broke the quiet, causing my spoon to clatter against the ceramic bowl. After the rejection the night before, any unexpected call felt instantly like a mounting threat. I checked the caller ID with noticeably trembling fingers, and my heart instantly accelerated upon seeing Marcus's name. "Hello," I answered, my voice sounding far more cautious than I had intended. "Mom?" This time, I noticed a tiny flicker of genuine warmth creeping around the edges of that single important word. "I truly want to apologize for the call last night," he said, the words rushing out. "I was completely out of line and wrong. I haven't been sleeping well." Relief flooded over me with such dizzying speed that I had to firmly grip the edge of the table to keep myself steady. The world tilted back on its axis. "Son, I am so incredibly relieved you called. I was honestly worried I had done something terrible." "No, Mom, you did nothing wrong at all," he assured me. "I was just so stressed about the market closing and the quarterly reports, and I took it out on the wrong person." Sarah actually sat me down and reminded me how fundamentally important our family traditions are. "We want you to come to Christmas dinner after all." "Tonight?" "Christmas Eve dinner. Of course. I'll be there," I instantly replied, joy bubbling up inside me like effervescent champagne, drowning out the lingering doubts. "I'll prepare Arthur's famous beef Wellington. I already bought the tenderloin just in case." "That sounds absolutely perfect." "Please bring everything you usually make," he said. And then there was a noticeable pause, a beat of silence that felt heavier than the rest. "Sarah is really excited," he continued. "The twins have been asking incessantly for more stories from Grandma Evelyn." Something about his sudden, intense enthusiasm sounded strangely rushed. It was almost as if it had been rehearsed, like he was reading from a required script written by a poor playwright. "Marcus, what made you suddenly change your mind so fast? Yesterday, you seemed so completely certain." "I simply realized my mistake." "That's all it was," he answered, his words stumbling over my question. "I have to go now. Work calls. We'll see you tonight around 6. Don't be late." "Wait, son. Can we just—" "I love you, Mom. See you soon." The call abruptly disconnected. I was left holding the phone, staring at it as though it might magically yield answers. For a brief moment, pure, unadulterated joy coursed through my veins. Christmas was saved. My family was restored. But in the heavy silence that followed, doubt began to filter in, cold and insidious, like drafty air through a cracked window pane. Something in Marcus's voice hadn't sounded quite right. The actual words were correct. The apology was appropriate, but the delivery felt hollow and mechanical, as if he were merely checking off items from a predetermined list to achieve a specific outcome. "Perhaps I'm just overthinking this," I murmured to Arthur's comforting memory as I continued my morning routine. Dishes in the sink, newspaper sorted for recycling, mug rinsed clean, yet that uncomfortable feeling only grew stronger. Marcus had actively avoided any attempt at a deeper conversation, fleeing the phone as if he genuinely feared awkward questions. Regardless of the gnawing anxiety, I had a mission. The next 6 hours were a blur of fierce determination. I moved through my kitchen with the precision of a surgeon. The beef Wellington was not just a meal, it was a legacy. Arthur had taught me the recipe during our first year of marriage. The mushroom duxelles had to be dry enough, the prosciutto wrapped tight enough, and the puff pastry chilled to the exact right temperature. "Arthur, I truly hope I remember this correctly," I whispered to his photo on the windowsill as I seared the beef tenderloin. "It must be perfect." By 5 p.m., I was dressed in my best deep green velvet dress, my pearls Arthur's 30th anniversary gift cool against my skin. The Wellington was wrapped and ready in the insulated carrier. The gifts for the twins, a telescope for Leo and a painting set for Mia, were packed in the car. As I backed my sedan out of the driveway, I glanced at my house. It stood dark and silent, save for the porch light. A sudden, irrational urge to run back inside and lock the door seized me. I shook it off. This was paranoia, nothing more. I was an old woman afraid of her own happiness. The drive to Marcus's estate took 45 minutes. He lived in a gated community where the houses were less like homes and more like fortresses of wealth. The driveways were heated, the lawns were manicured even in winter, and the silence was expensive. When I arrived, the house was a beacon of light. Every window was ablaze. As I stepped out into the biting cold, the front door swung open. Sarah stood there, looking radiant in a red silk dress, though her eyes seemed tired. "Evelyn, thank goodness you made it," she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "Let me take that heavy carrier." We moved into the foyer, which smelled of pine and expensive cologne. Marcus appeared from the living room, a Scotch glass in his hand. He looked impeccable, but there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that the cool air of the house couldn't explain. "Mom, you look great," he said, kissing my cheek. His lips were cold. "I'm glad you came." "I wouldn't miss it, Marcus. You know that." The evening proceeded with a strange, frantic energy. The twins, Leo and Mia, were delighted with their gifts, but Marcus kept ushering them away, checking his watch repeatedly. He was constantly checking his phone, jumping at every notification. "Is everything all right with work, Marcus?" I asked during appetizers. "Fine. Just market volatility. You know how it is," he snapped, then forced a smile. "Let's not talk shop." Dinner was served. The Wellington was unveiled to appropriate oohs and ahs. We raised our glasses. That was the moment the toast where the phone in my pocket buzzed. "You need to leave. Right now." The warning from the stranger echoed in my head as I stared at my son. "Mom? Who was that?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp. "Why do you look so pale?" I stammered, my mind racing. It was a wrong number, but they sounded distressed. "Ignore it," Marcus said, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "Probably a robocall. Eat your beef, Mom. It's getting cold." But I couldn't eat. The voice on the phone had been terrified. "Trust me and go now." Trust who? Why? What possible catastrophic emergency would require such extreme urgency that a stranger would track down my private number on Christmas Eve? I looked at Marcus. He was cutting his meat with aggressive, sawing motions. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the clock on the mantel. 7:15 p.m. "I have to use the restroom," I said abruptly, standing up. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, concerned. "Just a bit of dizzy spell. I'll be right back." I retreated to the powder room near the foyer and locked the door. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I looked at the call log. Unknown number. I couldn't call back. I stared at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked terrified. My intuition, honed by 70 years of life, was screaming at me. Something was wrong. Not here. There. At my house. If you stay, you lose everything. I unlocked the door and stepped out. I didn't return to the dining room. I walked straight to the closet and grabbed my coat. "Mom?" Marcus appeared in the hallway, his face a mask of confusion that quickly hardened into anger. "Where are you going?" "I have to leave, Marcus. There's an emergency at home." "What kind of emergency?" He moved to block my path, his movements jerky. "Who called you? Was it the alarm company?" "No," I lied, my voice surprisingly steady. "It was Mrs. Miller across the street. She says she smells smoke coming from my house." For a split second, panic flashed in Marcus's eyes, not concern for my safety, but panic of a different kind. "Smoke? That's ridiculous. You have the best fire system money can buy. It's probably just a fireplace draft. Sit down, Mom. Don't ruin dinner." "I'm not ruining dinner, Marcus. I'm protecting my home." I pushed past him. He grabbed my arm, gentle, but firm. "Mom, please, just stay. For the kids, for me." "Let go of me, Marcus." The command was so sharp, so like his father's, that he recoiled instinctively. I opened the heavy front door, and the cold air hit me like a slap. "I'll call you when I know what's happening," I said, and I walked out. I drove like a madwoman. The roads were icy, but I didn't care. The voice on the phone played on a loop in my head. As I merged onto the highway, a terrifying thought crystallized. Marcus hadn't asked if I was okay. He hadn't offered to come with me. He had tried to keep me there. Why? I pushed the sedan to 80 miles per hour. The familiar streets of my neighborhood finally appeared, quiet and snow-covered. My house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac. There was no smoke, no fire trucks. It looked exactly as I had left it. Or did it? I killed the headlights and coasted to a stop 2 houses down, in front of Mr. Henderson's driveway. Mr. Henderson was a retired police captain, a man Arthur had respected deeply. I stepped out of the car, clutching my heavy brass keychain as a weapon. The silence of the street was heavy. I crept through the side yard, using the high hedges for cover. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached the back of the house. The garden gate was unlatched. I knew I had latched it. I stepped into the backyard and looked at the rear windows. A faint beam of light, like a flashlight, danced across the ceiling of Arthur's study. Someone was inside. I didn't call the police immediately. I knew the response time on Christmas Eve would be slow. Instead, I moved to the basement storm doors. They were old, heavy steel. I pulled on the handle. Locked. But I knew the trick. Arthur had never fixed the hinge pin on the right side. I worked it loose with my key and slipped inside the basement, silent as a ghost in my own home. I could hear footsteps above me. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. They were in the study, where the wall safe was hidden behind the oil painting of the coastline. I crept up the basement stairs, avoiding the third step that always squeaked. The door to the kitchen was slightly ajar. I peered through the crack. A man was standing in the hallway, his back to me. He was dressed in black, wearing a ski mask. He was holding a crowbar in one hand and a thick canvas duffel bag in the other. He was speaking into a phone pressed to his ear. "I can't find the combination, Marcus. You said it was in the desk drawer. It's not there." My heart stopped. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. "Marcus." The intruder listened, then hissed, "I don't care if she left. You were supposed to keep her there for at least 3 hours. If she comes back." Okay, I'm drilling it. But this is going to cost you double." He hung up and turned toward the study. It wasn't a stranger. The voice. I knew that voice. It was Julian, Marcus's college roommate, the man who had stood as best man at his wedding, the man who had started that failing venture capital firm with my son. A fury unlike anything I had ever felt surged through me. It burned away the fear, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. I looked around the kitchen. My eyes landed on the heavy cast-iron skillet drying on the rack. I grabbed the skillet. It weighed 5 pounds, solid iron. I stepped into the hallway. Julian was kneeling before the safe in the study, the drill whining as it bit into the metal. He didn't hear me approach over the noise of the tool. "Julian," I said. He spun around, dropping the drill. He scrambled backward, eyes wide behind the mask. He saw the skillet raised in my hand, and he saw the look in my eyes, a look that promised absolute violence. "Mrs. Vance, wait!" "Don't you move," I commanded, my voice shaking with rage. "Take off that mask." He hesitated. I took a step forward, raising the iron pan higher. "Take it off." He pulled the wool cap off. Julian's face was pale, sweaty, and terrified. He looked nothing like the confident businessman I had known. He looked like a cornered rat. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I had to," he stammered. We owe the wrong people, Evelyn. A lot of money." "They were going to hurt us," Marcus said. "He said the bonds were just sitting there. He said you wouldn't even miss them." "The bonds," I repeated. "Arthur's municipal bonds, his life savings, the money meant for the grandchildren's college funds. The money meant to build the library wing in his name. Marcus sent you to rob me?" "He set it up," Julian cried, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. The dinner, the apology, it was all a distraction. He knew the house would be empty. My phone rang in my pocket. I pulled it out with my left hand, keeping the skillet trained on Julian. It was Marcus, I answered, putting it on speaker. "Mom, are you home? Is everything okay?" His voice was laced with a panic he was trying desperately to hide. "I'm looking at Julian, Marcus," I said coldly. The silence on the other end was absolute. It was the silence of a life imploding. "Mom, wait, let me explain. He has a drill, Marcus. He was drilling into your father's safe. He says you sent him." "Mom, please, listen to me. It's a misunderstanding. I'm in trouble, Mom, serious trouble." "So you decided to rob your mother? You decided to use Christmas to use your father's memory as a trap?" "I didn't have a choice," he screamed, his facade finally cracking. "I'm ruined, Mom. I have millions in debt. They're going to take the house, the cars, Everything. I just needed a loan. You wouldn't give it to me. You never asked, I said, tears finally spilling over. You stole. I hung up the phone. I looked at Julian. Get out. What? Get out of my house before I kill you. Leave the bag. Leave the tools. Go. Julian didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled up and bolted out the back door, disappearing into the snowy night. I didn't chase him. I didn't call the police immediately. Instead, I walked to the study. I looked at the scarred paint around the safe. I looked at the photo of Arthur on the desk, watching over the room. I'm sorry, Arthur, I whispered. I failed. I sat in Arthur's chair for 10 minutes, gathering my strength. Then, I picked up the phone and dialed the police. I reported the break-in. I gave them Julian's name. And then, with a heavy heart, I gave them Marcus's name. An hour later, Mr. Henderson was sitting in my kitchen, pouring me a cup of tea while the officers finished their report. He had seen the police lights and come running. You're a brave woman, Evelyn, he said softly. I'm not brave, Frank, I replied, staring into the dark tea. I'm a mother who just lost her son. You didn't lose him tonight, Frank said wisely. You lost him a long time ago. Tonight, you just found out the truth. The drive back to Marcus's estate the next morning was the hardest journey of my life. The sun was shining on the pristine snow, a cruel beauty that mocked the devastation in my heart. I had documents with me, the police report, and a new document I had drafted with my lawyer at 8 a.m. When I arrived, the house looked different. It looked like a tomb. There were 2 police cruisers in the driveway. Marcus was already in custody. I walked into the house. Sarah was sitting on the stairs, weeping. The twins were nowhere to be seen, likely with a nanny or a neighbor. When Sarah saw me, she stood up, her eyes red and swollen. Evelyn, she choked out. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I looked at her, searching for any sign of deception. I saw only heartbreak. She was a victim in this too. I believe you, Sarah, I said softly. Marcus was being led out of the study in handcuffs. He looked haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. When he saw me, he stopped. Mom, he croaked. Mom, please. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I had permission. You can fix this. I stared at the man who had once been the boy, with the gap-toothed smile. I searched for that boy, but he was gone. Consumed by greed. Consumed by the need to maintain an image of success at the cost of his soul. I can't fix this, Marcus, I said, my voice steady and clear. You broke it. Mom, I'm your son. And Arthur was your father. And you tried to steal his legacy to pay for your gambling and your lies. I pulled the document from my bag. This, I said, holding it up, is a restraining order and a copy of my revised will. Everything, the bonds, the house, the savings is going to the street, Jude's Children's Research Hospital, and the Arthur Vance Scholarship Fund. You will not see a penny. Not now. Not ever. Marcus's face crumpled. He realized finally that the well had run dry. The officers nudged him forward. As he was let out the door, he didn't look back at his wife. He didn't look back at his house. He just stared at the ground, defeated by his own hubris. I turned to Sarah. She was trembling. He gambled it all away, she whispered. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. The kids' college funds, gone. I walked over to her and took her hands. They were cold. Sarah, listen to me. You are still family. You and the twins. You always will be. I have plenty of room in the Victorian. It's too big for one old woman anyway. Pack your things. Come home. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing. 3 months later, the snow had melted, giving way to the first green shoots of spring. I sat on my back porch, watching Leo and Mia chase each other around the garden. The old Victorian house was no longer silent. It was filled with the chaotic, beautiful noise of life. Sarah had filed for divorce and was slowly rebuilding her architecture practice. Using the guest room as a studio, we were healing. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I cried for the son I had lost, and nights when Sarah cried for the husband she thought she knew, but we were safe. I picked up the photo album from the table. I had put the picture of Marcus back in. I couldn't erase him, nor did I want to. He was a lesson. a painful scar that reminded us of what happens when we value things over people and image over integrity. Arthur's legacy wasn't the money. It wasn't the bonds or the stocks. It was the truth. He had always taught me that the truth was the only solid foundation to build a life on. Marcus had built his castle on sand, and it had washed away. We were rebuilding on rock. I took a sip of my coffee and watched the sun dip below the horizon. The phone rang inside the house. I let it ring. If it was important, they would leave a message. For now, I was exactly where I needed to be. The voice on the phone that Christmas Eve, I later found out it was Julian's ex-girlfriend, a woman who had overheard the planning and couldn't bear the guilt, had saved me. Trust me, and go now. I had trusted the warning. But more importantly, I had learned to trust myself, to trust that I could survive the betrayal, that I could stand alone if I had to, and that true family isn't defined by blood, but by the loyalty and love we show one another when the winter comes. And as I watched my grandchildren play in the fading light, I knew that despite everything, the warmth had finally returned to this house.